Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Hi there, you're very welcome to today's episode, which I'm calling the Inner CEO and Entrepreneur. I'm going to share a few thoughts here that I'm actually taking from a book that I'm writing at the moment called The Inner CEO. And I suppose maybe to lead us into it for a little bit here, some food for thought, as what I suppose in my head what this podcast is all about. If you could think about a time when you were at your very best, your best ever, maybe when you were in the flow or the zone, maybe everything you touched turned to gold, like the Midas touch, and just think about your level of thinking in that scenario or that mode. You know, it's going to be optimistic. It's kind of what I would call a free flow mode. You're not really stuck in any sort of analytical thinking. You're very much, in my experience, working with people when they're at their best, or even where I'm at the best myself, is like you're just everything's kind of moving in the right direction. And even setbacks, they don't really stick to you in the same way as when you're not in that mode. And I mean, how great would it be to be in that mode more consistently? And that is, that's a key focus and passion for me, is to how do you do that more and more? And that's a lot of the time what I do with my clients. You know, and certainly it's the thing that I'm most interested in. And unlike everybody else, we can all get stuck at different times. But when you're in that inspired state, that flow state, my experience is showing me that something natural emerges from within you. And so when you're in that mode, you tend to be more in tune with your intuition, your innate wisdom, creativity, the authentic you. You know, your gut feeling. In that kind of mode, you just know certain things. Sometimes it's hard to explain to people. You know, it's I don't know why I have to do this, but I have to do this, or do it this way, or I have to change direction, or maybe you have to leave a situation. It's just your gut comes in. And to me, when you're in that state, and it is a very specific state that I think we can all relate to, that is when this deeper part of your own intelligence comes in, what I'm going to call the inner CEO. And you know, in a business context, in a leadership context, a CEO is somebody who is in charge of running the organization or an organization. The buck stops with him or her. And you have to develop certain skills to become a really good CEO. And you get good at those skills, the business will thrive. If you're not that good at those skills, the business, as we all know, will decline and maybe even die. And what most people don't always think about, and this is, I suppose, over the last 25 years, where it's been a passion that has kind of gradually developed into something that I really have experienced and seen. And in the last few years, my own take on some of this stuff has changed. And so now what I realize is we all have an inner world. We all have an inner organization. But we haven't always activated the inner CEO. And there are certain skills that inner CEO has and also needs to develop. So I tend to look at it like this, and this may be very simplistic, so forgive me if it is, but it's kind of like the sun and the clouds. You know, the sun, to me, it's there, it's always there. But in Ireland in particular, you know, cloud country, very often, sometimes you can forget that the sun even exists because there's a lot of cloud. Now, at the moment today, there's plenty of sun, which is fantastic, but the clouds can sometimes cloud over that sun. And you'd be forgiven for thinking the sun didn't exist. But when the sun comes out, my God, is it beautiful in Ireland. You know, Ireland's great anyway, but when the sun comes out, it's just multiplied by 10. And your inner world is the same thing. The sun, essentially, to me, is the deeper part of your own wisdom, intelligence. And with that comes clarity. Big word, that's an important word, clarity, sense of clarity, personal clarity, you know, which brings purpose. And so the clouds, though, are your thinking. And I was, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with people over the last few months about this concept, especially as it's very hot for me in terms of my book. And most people, I think, seem to think I'm just talking about, you know, I know about the mind, but they're really, what they're hearing me say is more to do with achievement. And it's not that. for me, it's very much about, yes, creating success, but also being able to enjoy it and squeeze enjoyment and fulfillment out of life. And for a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs in particular, I think they pay too heavy a price. I mean, there's always a price to be paid, but I think it can be too heavy for them, for their families, and for their teams. And how do you know if you're in the inner CEO mode? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is it's wired into everybody. That's my experience. So the trick really is really more to understand how do you get out of your own way, and the way to do that is to understand the real extent to which our mind and our thinking influences ourselves. And I suppose I'm going to share a couple of things here. But when you're in that zone, when on the flip side to maybe we look towards maybe some of the negatives, you're there when you're not reacting, when you're not losing your temper or getting overly stressed, when it's not all about your ego or all about you, or it's about greed. Because the inner CEO, that natural part of you, is more about winning, yes, in your life, but also to help other people around you to win. And I mean, I think the conditioning that we've had without realizing it, and especially in the Western world, is like, when I get what I want, then I help everybody else. I mean, and that's not the worst thing in the world. But the problem is that, in my experience, that mindset doesn't always go away because it's unconscious. It's always lurking around. And it's a dangerous one because, if you're driving towards when I get what I want, this is what I want. And I want this to be the way it is. I want you to do things the way that I want you to do. It's an unconscious mindset for a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs and leaders and CEOs. And even the more successful they become, the worse it gets because nobody's around them to tell them otherwise. And they're lost in an echo chamber. But when the inner CEO is there, and it's there for everybody, this is not something that, which I find, fascinating. Actually, bizarrely, it's actually wired into us. So just to give an example of how it can show up is the eureka moment in the shower. You're relaxing, you're switched off. You're switched off what? You're switched off your thinking. And then the eureka moment comes in, that idea, that solution, that breakthrough, or it might happen for you when you're exercising, when you're running, the gym. Dr. Herbert Benson in Harvard, associate professor of medicine, did some massive research around this area, and he calls it the Breakout Principle, where you kind of, you break the previous patterns of thought, is the way he expressed it. But what's really happening, and this is what I've, I suppose, discovered from my own interest and passion around things like psychology, neuroscience, even meditation, yoga, and then looking at organizations like MIT, is that when your mind switches off from its analytical thinking or stewing on things, again, thinking, you access a different part of your mind, a deeper part of your mind that is beyond the personal mind. It kind of taps into something different. Now, in certain contexts, they might call that the universal mind, or you could call it innate wisdom, or your intuition, or something maybe underneath all of the past and the collection of beliefs and limitations and everything else that we have in our unconscious mind. So very often, somebody can be very, very good at being successful in business, and they would say, well, I'm using my mind to do that. And that would be true. Like a lot of top achievers in business, in any context, actually, they're always using their mind in a certain way. But if you don't have the full awareness of what's going on in your inner organization, which is being able to bring in the inner CEO, you might actually have the inner COO in charge instead, which to me is more the intellect. But the inner CEO is beyond your intellect. And that's a difficult sometimes point to try and get across. But the way that you would see it, because a lot of times when I'm trying to explain this, especially with hardened, experienced CEOs or business owners, think, listen, Shane, we don't want happy clappy and be all lovey. And for me, I think the old model, because a lot of business really has a toxicity to it that is just not talked about enough, regardless of how great you think you might be or how great your organization is. There is toxicity at a higher level, really, and that is showing up in the level of poor engagement that consistently is coming out in companies, especially research done by Gallup, which is showing a massive disengagement really with people and their work. Now, I do think it's two ways. It's employees and it's also leaders, so we have to work together. But I think the blind spot really is how we're working from the insides out. And the new model, I think, is really more about, an indicator is tough love with humility. Is that like some of the best leaders that I know, they can be very tough, because you have to be in business and you have to be in any context to win in sport or in any sort of organization. Toughness is essential. But love perhaps also needs to come in more. And I often think about that great book from Jim Collins, Good to Great. There's so much in it. But if you've read that book, you'll know the concept of what he calls a level 5 leader, where he's talking about somebody who is very humble, but has this fierce professional will and drive for the organization to succeed. So I suppose, from my own experience of working with leaders over the last 25 years, that and also watching myself, because I'm not immune to any of this myself. Indeed, God, I've gotten caught up with my ego in different times over my lifetime. I still can. But I'm very interested in helping others get out of the way of their thinking and their ego, and for myself as well, of course. And just as a recent example, I was doing some work with the CEO over the last, we'll say, 12 months. And this person on the face will be very successful, has everything going for them. But I suppose the reason they came to me was that they just felt they were off their game. And this person has just a really, really good CEO, but they were just off their game. And so we're having a conversation. And as we're talking it out, I'm not really caring about anything that they're talking about their outer world. I'm looking at, okay, I'm trying to see, how are they thinking? What are they thinking? Because a lot of the time what we're thinking is unconscious. And it was very clear then that this guy had something at the back of his mind. And as I dug and dug and dug, eventually we got to this point where he started to realize, oh yeah, there's this thing at the back of my mind I've been worrying about. And so we brought it out, we discussed it, and he looked at it, which to me shined the light of awareness or consciousness on it. And what's interesting is that if you recall, I gave a formula, I think in one of the early episodes, about performance, a high performance formula, and the blocker of that really was around interference, and interference really is inner interference. And so for him, he had a niggle at the back of his mind that didn't seem on the face of it to be massive, but actually it was huge in terms of what it was doing to his mindset, his energy, and actually it was blocking his natural intelligence and wisdom and creativity from coming through. He was blocking the inner CEO. The intellect had got onto this worry at an unconscious level and had assumed command of his inner world, his inner organization. The inner CEO was no longer in charge. So, I mean, how do you recognize somebody who's tapped into their inner CEO? I think, for me, really, it's nothing to do with the material success or even the business success. I've met a lot of people who have got, phenomenal business success, but they're just not tapped into their inner CEO. Not really. For me, the simple indicator is all to do with the people around them in their work and in their lives. And have they transformed, or are they transforming? Are they winning? What are they like in terms of their state, their mood, their results, their sense of va-va-voom, their life? A transformative leader is somebody who's tapped into their inner CEO, and the indicator is that the people around them are growing. They are growing. So some questions to consider for yourself, maybe if you're interested in activating or getting better around your inner CEO. I'm sorry, what I should say, we're all in business, so am I. So there's 2 courses you might check out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. One is Mindshift. You can find it somewhere on my the Academy section of my webpage, ShaneCraddock.com. And another one which is coming up in May of 2021 is a new one, brand new, called Sustainable High Performance, 3-day program. We're going to do a deep dive and all this kind of stuff. It's new material, stuff that I haven't covered before in any context. And it's a 3-day intensive. So I'm taking a different approach to a lot of other work that I do. So if you're a leader in any context, at any level, and any of this resonates, I would encourage you to check it out. I'll put a link in the notes here somewhere. Anyway, back to the questions. So, how consistently are you in a good mood? If it goes up and down like a yo-yo, you're not maximizing your inner CEO. How well are the people around you doing in work and your personal life? Your family. I mean, if you're tapped into the inner CEO, it impacts on them hugely. And for the people around you, how much are they winning? How much are they growing? How much are they alive is a key measure. So, and even for you, how much enjoyment are you squeezing out of life? You can be great and a rock star in business, but actually have no enjoyment in life. And it means you're not using the full extent of the inner CEO. And then maybe finally, how much inner clarity do you have? Personal clarity. You can have great directional clarity about where you're going and visions for the business and strategy, but also the most important one really is your own sense of connection to yourself, your own inner clarity of how to manage your inner organization. So I suppose in conclusion, what I'd say is, look, we do, in my mind, we need a new type of CEO in the world. I think if anything what the pandemic has shown us is that a lot of the leaders at a high level, and certainly in governments, are lacking. They're probably doing their best, but I think it's because there's a lack of awareness and understanding around how to tap into and organize and manage and run their inner worlds. So the new type of CEO is one that works, leads, and lives, I guess, from the inner CEO is what I would see. And when you're in that space, you lead from a place of deep, authentic centeredness and not one of ego. I think we've had enough of that. I think most people know that we need a new model. And the good news is that just with a little bit of reflection in terms of ourselves and just being aware and maybe open to the possibility that, you know what, a lot of what we're looking for is already built into us. It's hardwired into us. At least that's what I'm seeing. So anyway, if any of this strikes a chord, you might send me an email, shane@shanecraddock.com with 1D. And before you go, if you like the podcast, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe, give it a star rating and a review, and maybe share it with one or two friends. It's all appreciated. It all helps. So many thanks. I hope you got some food for thought today. Bye-bye.